I'm gonna ask that you look at your Bibles, because I'm not gonna take time to read all of that so that we have time to really dig in to some of the things that are here. So let's take a look at the two quotes that are there on your screen. On on August 31st in 1897, which is long after 1854, and even after 88 for that matter, she says, "We are standing on the threshold of great and solemn events. Many of the prophecies, not just history, but the prophecies are about to be repeated, are about to be fulfilled in quick succession. Every element of power is about to be set to work. Past history will be repeated, old controversies will arouse to new life, and peril will beset God's people on every side. Intensity is taking hold of the human family, it's permitting everything upon the earth." And then she specifically says, and we looked at this in our big poster, big chart study, that study Revelation in connection with Daniel, for history will be repeated. We, with all our religious advantages, ought to know more today than we do know. So in this quote, she makes it very clear that there's prophecies still going to be fulfilled after almost 1900. She makes it clear that past history is going to be repeated and that old controversies will arise to new life. And then she specifically addresses Daniel and Revelation and says that history will be repeated. Again, she makes that statement. Then in letter 57 in 1896, which would have been before the one we just read, she said, "The light which Daniel received direct from God was given especially for these last days." Does that sound to you like it's in the past? Now, there can be partial fulfillment in the past, but she's very clear things are going to be repeated, that they have a final end time event that will take place. And then she specifically says the visions he saw by the banks of the Uli, which we're going to take a look at today, that's Daniel 8. And the Hiddekel, which is Daniel 11, are now in progress of fulfillment, and all the events foretold will soon have come to pass. So when we take a look at Daniel 8, we can't say that it's all the country of Greece, the first king of Greece. Do you understand what I'm saying? That's what we have understood from the past, which is fine, but we're told it's going to be repeated, which means it has to have a current day fulfillment. Does that make sense? Okay. So what we're going to take a look at is a few things today. We're going to back up just a smidgen so that we have some things that help us plug pieces in. So we're going to actually go back to Daniel 2 for just a second. We're going to go to Daniel 2, verse 33 and 34, or maybe 35 as well. And it says, "His legs of iron, his feet, part of iron and part of clay." It says, "Thou sawest till a stone was cut out without hands, which smote the image upon his feet." Okay, so we know that we're living in the toes of the image, right? Really kind of the toenails of the image. And we know that the stone that's cut out, I always draw it as the 10 Commandments, because we know that in the end, it's going to be the law of God against the law of man. And so as the stone hits the feet, it says it hits the feet that were of iron and clay and breaks them into pieces. And then verse 35 says, "Then was the iron, the clay, the brass, the silver, the gold, broken into pieces together and became like the chaff of the summer threshing floors, and the wind carried them away. So we know from this very first illustration of all of the kingdoms that they are all present at the time of destruction. Does that make sense? So the stone, literally, it lists every single one. It grinds all of them to pieces and they're blown away. All right. Now we're going to go to Daniel 7. Daniel 7 is now, Daniel's like 80 plus years old. This is the first year of Belshazzar, so we know that it's 3 years before Babylon is destroyed. And he's given his first vision, at least the first one he documents of his. And he describes 4 beasts that rise from the sea. It tells us in verse 3 of chapter 7. Does everybody agree with that? They rise from the sea? Okay. And then we read down through, and then it gives us a little information about the first 3. Not a lot, just a little bit of information about the first 3. And then it describes that 4th one in much more detail than he got in the first dream of the image that came through the king. And then it also gives us a picture of the throne room in heaven. So it focuses a little more on that stone kingdom. It gives us more information. But verse 12 of Daniel 7 gives us a highlight of a change to come. It says, well, first off, it's been describing the destruction of that 4th beast. It's like God's assuring Daniel that beast isn't going to live forever. It's going to have an end. But in verse 12, it says, concerning the rest of the beasts, so it's talking about the first 3, they had their dominion taken away, yet their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. So when we look at this process, obviously, whatever Babylon owned, when Media-Persia came in, they got Babylon, and then they expanded their kingdom. And we're going to take a look at the history of how that takes place. But verse 12 tells us that those other 3 kingdoms still have their lives. They're prolonged for something that's going to happen in the future, for a season and a time. So then it goes on to describe the stone kingdom, and we come down to verse 17. In verse 17, it says, these great beasts, which are 4, so it's now naming 4 beasts, are 4 kings, which shall arise out of the earth. So this time, there's 4 beasts that are 4 kings that are going to come from the earth. They don't come from the sea. And Ellen White tells us in The Spirit of Prophecy, we always hear that the earth means unpopulated. But she has other quotes that say that it can also mean a gentle, nonviolent transition to power. So the United States was already populated by Native Americans. It's not like it wasn't populated. And so we teach that it was, a sparsely populated land. Well, that depends on how you look at it. There were native peoples that were here first. And the people came from Europe and started a new country, but there was no huge battle to take over the country. And so they did oppress the Native Americans here. There's no question about that. But as they formed our country, which becomes the buffalo with the 2 horns, no pope, no king, that transition was much calmer, much less violent than when Media Persia took over Babylon, and when Greece took over that, and when Rome took over that. So as we look at 17, it says, these great beasts, which are four kings which shall arise out of the earth. So there is the implication here that there's a future time, both in verse 12 and 17, for these nations, that they would rise in the future. We know in Daniel 8, if we go to Daniel 8:23, this is describing the four horns that are going to come up out of the goat's head after the big horn is broken off. Verse 23 says, and in the latter time of their kingdom, implying that it's one kingdom, but it's being run by at least four beasts. It's a conglomerate kingdom. I personally believe that Daniel 8 is what helps us connect Daniel and Revelation. Daniel 8 is what helps us make the connection between Daniel 7 and Revelation 13. Revelation 13, we have the dragon, we have the first beast, which is described. And when we take a look at that first beast, and we'll be going into that in more depth in a little bit, when we take a look at that first beast, Spirit of Prophecy tells us several things about that beast. And then we will take a look at that, what it refers to as the second beast, the new one that rises out of the earth, that's represented by the buffalo with the two horns. So I believe that Daniel 7 and 8, these verses in 7 and chapter 8, help us connect how the beasts of Daniel 7 rise again in power. There's a quote in the Spirit of Prophecy. Let me see if I can share it with you. Here we go. Oh, my thing keeps wanting to hop around. Oh, I don't want to zoom in. How do I zoom back out? Oh, good. Okay. Sorry, I am the least techie of all people practically on the planet. So here's a quote from Signs of the Times, November 1. And again, this is 1899. And she says, under the symbols of a great red dragon, a leopard-like beast, and a beast with lamb-like horns, the earthly governments, which would especially engage in trampling upon God's law and persecuting God's people, were presented to John. The war is carried to the close of time. There's another quote that I would like to share with you here. It says, in the scriptures are truths that relate especially to our own time, to the period just prior to the appearing of the Son of Man. The prophetic periods, extending to the very eve of the great consummation, throw a flood of light upon events then to transpire. This was written in 1883. Trying to get you guys back, you all disappeared. And so, you know, we had part of this conversation in one of our meetings. There was a gentleman who was struggling with the prophecies having anything to do with our time, with them having ended in 1844. And yet she makes it very clear that there are prophetic periods and that they extend all the way to the end. And so we have to be careful that we don't become like Israel of old and believe that we have all the truth. That is a dangerous place for us to be, because we are told in her writings, we're told in the scriptures, there will be more light. there will be more light. We have to compare everything to the spirit of prophecy and the scriptures. We have to know that they're true. But we have to be careful that we don't limit God. And he also has promised us that he does nothing without telling the prophets. Well, I believe he's already told the prophets. We just haven't fully understood it. And that's why we keep being instructed over and over. Study Daniel and Revelation. Why would she give us that instruction in the late 1800s, early 1900s, if we already knew what it all was? And she keeps giving us instruction to read, to study. There's more to know. There's warnings we don't understand. There's things there we need to understand. So we come to, let me see if I think I had one more quote that I want to share with you. So let's just take a look at that. And that's this quote that says that the Sabbath question will be the issue in the great conflict in which all the world will act a part. But she quotes Revelation 13, 4 through 8 and 10. And then she says this entire chapter is a revelation of what will surely take place. We have a tendency to, with Revelation 13 as well, believe that we have all of the understanding. We teach that it is all in the past, until you get to the part where the new beast, the United States, is formed. But she literally tells us in this quote that the entire chapter is a revelation of what will surely take place. So there has been a partial fulfillment of this in the past. But when she talks about 13 being kind of repeated in the future, she doesn't just begin with the new beast. Her quote goes clear back to verses 4 and 5 that are about how the dragon gives his power to the beast and how that first beast is going to be worshipped. So these things happened in Europe during the Dark Ages. But we know that's going to happen again in our time, in the end times. And so we're going to take a look today at what that would look like. Okay? So back to chapter 8 of Daniel. It goes on to describe an activity that's going to take place. You have your Bibles in front of you, so I'm not going to read Daniel 8 to you. I'm going to sum it up, but you can check me with your Bible, okay? So there's a goat that gets so angry with the ram that is referred to as choler. And the definition of choler is the highest form of hatred. Okay? It's true hatred of this country and what it represents. So it also tells us that this ram with the two horns is going to do something so terrible that it's going to make this goat be so angry and full of hatred for that ram that it's going to break both of its horns and it's going to trample it into the ground as though it doesn't exist. And then after that happens, that big horn is going to break off and this goat is going to grow great. Okay? So this story did play out with Greece, Media Persia, Alexander the Great. His kingdom was broken into 4 generals, right? We know that history. But we are told this will be repeated. This will have its final fulfillment at the end times. So that means there has to be an application for these last days, for the times that we are living in. So we're going to take a look at what that might represent, okay? So in my book that I wrote, I don't know if you have access to that or not. I'm going to put it up here on the screen. In Daniel chapter 8, it says,
Sorry, Mrs. Debbie. You never changed the first image, so we are seeing the same all the
I
time.
am so
The
sorry.
first one.
It's changing on my screen and not yours. Okay.
Yes, you have to change when you share.
Okay,
And
let me try.
you don't need to close. You don't need to close. Just put again. Share the. I don't remember now, but okay.
Okay, can you see the book?
Yes, and you can you please make the zoom a little bit bigger? It's in the middle of the page. We can see you have 100% in the middle of the page. You can
Oh, you want to see the whole page?
a little bit more, please. Yes,
Okay.
to read it because I don't have a PC laptop, and so it's a little bit.
Is that better?
I think she wants
No,
to
bigger.
Oh, you want bigger? I'm
Yes, no
sorry.
100%. Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Thanks. Oh, better. Thanks.
Okay. So the quotes that I have just read to you are on this screen, but this is another one where she tells us in Christ Object Lessons that in every age there is a new development of truth, a message of God to the people of that generation. The old truths are all essential. New truth is not independent of the old, but it is an unfolding of it. It is only as the old truths are understood that we can comprehend the new. When Christ desired to open to his disciples the truth of his resurrection, he started at Moses and came through all the prophets and expounded them to them in all the scriptures the things concerning himself. But in the light which shines on the fresh unfolding of truth that glorifies the old, he who rejected or neglects the new does not really possess the old. For him, it loses its vital power. It becomes a lifeless form. And we are seeing the consequence of this in our church. This is why people, they just don't care. There's no new growth. There's no change in the life. You know, when I was a child and a person would be baptized, there was expectation that that person would change, that you would see Jesus transform them. But as I got older, I saw they were baptizing people that were still smoking, still drinking, who had terrible, filthy language and behavior. And they would baptize them, and that never changed. They never stopped smoking. They never stopped drinking. And we didn't see that transforming power. And it's because when you think you have all the truth and there's nothing more to learn, what a terrible place to be. Can you imagine in any other area of your life that you would believe you knew everything and you could never learn anything new? We have all of eternity to learn new things. That's never going to stop. But she specifically says, increased light will shine upon all the grand truths of prophecy. They will be seen in freshness, in brilliance, because the bright beams of the Sun of Righteousness will illuminate the whole. Meaning, each generation has parts, they have pieces. But eventually this all weaves into a tapestry, and until you put those pieces together, it can't make sense all by itself. Everything has to come together. We also will notice In Daniel 8:17, she's very clear. It says, "So he came near where I stood, and when he came, I was afraid, and I fell upon my face. And he said to me, Understand, O son of man," this is Daniel saying, "for at the time of the end shall be the vision." It's very clear that Daniel 8 is a vision for the end, too. You know what I mean? It's not, we know that the time of the end began in 1844, but this vision is for the end. And if you look at there's verses here, verse 17 says the time of the end. Verse 19 says, in the last end of the indignation, for at the appointed time the end will be. Verse 23 says, their kingdom, referring to the fact that these four kings merge into one kingdom. It talks about the sin cup being filled up. And from all that we've ever studied in the Bible, we know that the sin cup, when it's filled up, what happens? Destruction, right? God takes them out when their cup of indignation. And we haven't seen nations completely wiped out, right? We're even told here that while they may have been captured by the next part of the image, they are not destroyed. They're not annihilated or done away with. And then it goes on, and verse 24 talks about persecution, talks about tyrannical rule. It talks about being broken without a hand. Verse 26 tells us for many days in the future. And then in verse 27, and we talked about this before, Daniel gets upset because he does not understand the vision. He's been taught about he's going to be shown the 2300 days. He's going to be shown all of that. And then in Daniel 12, he's reminded again, this is going to rise again for another time. And he's just like, isn't the first time enough? 2300 years of persecution for the church. I mean, that had to have sounded completely overwhelming to Daniel. He even becomes afraid that he doesn't understand the 70 years and that Babylon's not going to be released and go back. And God has to assure him, nope, that's still going to happen, but that's just a part of everything that's going to unfold. So the question then comes, if Daniel 8 is in the future, what would that look like? So we're going to take a look at two parts. We're going to look at the war between the goat and the ram. And then we're going to look especially at the goat and the four horns that are going to come out of his head. Because that's the significant part that's going to help us understand the future. So I've shown you this poster. And we're going to take a look specifically at the ram first, okay? So Daniel sees a ram with two horns, one higher than the other, that comes up last. The two horns are the kings of Media and Persia. The Bible tells us that. But if you do the research today, it is Iraq that would create the little horn and Iran that would create the bigger horn that came up later. Even until the 1980s, Iran was called Persia. After there was a war, and after every war, especially world wars, they draw new lines on the map and they rename countries. This happens every time there's a war. And so up until the 1980s, Iran was called Persia, and I have documentation for you for that. And so we know that from the island of Cyprus, which has two military bases on it, one is the UN and one belongs to the United States. From the island of Cyprus, the United States and the UN combined, they went in and killed Saddam Hussein. And they did that mostly by aerial force. And that took out the country of Iraq. And when that happened, Iran, which had not been that big of a power, suddenly grew up great. And it not only became its own bigger country, but it took over where Iraq had been. Even though they're two separate countries on the map, anyone who knows anything about politics will tell you that Iran controls Iraq, especially since Saddam Hussein was taken out of office. So, knowing that this beast could be Iran and Iraq, and that would completely comply with its need to be Medio-Persia because it was Persia. We know that when Media-Persia took over, Media disappeared, correct? And it was Persia who became the big power. Okay, so we also know that, well, before we go any further, I want to take a look. Let me see if I can zoom in further. We know that this animal, this ram, the Bible does not identify its body. The goat, it tells us that the body is the king of Greece and the horn is the first king. But with this ram, there is no identification of the body, only the horns. And I think part of the reason for that is I believe that this animal that is represented here, the entire thing that holds up those two countries is ISIS, it's terrorism, it's Hamas, it's the ideology of the kingdom that creates that kingdom. Okay? And this is majorly in the news today. And I am going to show you some things that might be a little bit startling when we near the end of this. Okay? To show you that this is being fulfilled as we speak. And I'm not kidding. So, this creature could easily be represented by Iran, Iraq, and that whole terrorism ideology that has created this kingdom. It fits perfectly because it's still Persia. There is no other country on our planet right now that can comply with that requirement to be Persia. And that's the one thing, as we look at these creatures having a symbol in current history or current events, we can't just randomly pull a new country out and stick it in there because it's in the news. Do you understand what I mean? It has to still comply. The old has to be the foundation. And the Bible is clear that this is Media-Persia. Okay? See if I can go out a little bit now. This is really good for me. I'm learning all kinds of new things all the time here. Okay, so it tells us that the ram, this two-horned ram, is going to push westward. Okay, so now we're going to see if this complies. Is Iran pushing toward the west, which on a map is Israel? Are they currently using Hamas and several other terrorist organizations to create havoc in Israel? They are. We know that, I believe it was October 7, they came across the border. They came in with those, I don't remember what they're called, like hang glider things. And they shot up all those people that were in that concert, and they captured people and they tortured people to death. They killed over 2,000 people that day. It was a Sabbath. It was intentional. The timing was very intentional. And right now in the news, they're supposed to be releasing their hostages. And I will show you the clip that just happened this last week. 2 politicians and the president of Israel made it very clear that they plan to abolish, destroy, absolutely erase Iran from its existence on the map. Because there were 2 babies and their mama that they took as hostages that were supposed to be released this last week. And they brought the 2 boys back in coffins and claimed the building they were in was blown up by one of Israel's rockets. They did autopsies on the boys, and they found out that the terrorists had literally torn them apart limb from limb while they were alive in front of their mother. The mother, they claimed, was the 3rd body they returned. They did an autopsy. It's not her. It's some other person. It's not even one of the hostages. And so they haven't even released the mother. They don't know if she's still alive. They don't know if she's dead. They don't know where the mother is. And this ticked off the United States, who's been a part of this, getting them to release the hostages. They're making everybody move out of Gaza. President Trump claims he's going to turn it into some wealthy tourist thing where people from all around the world can come. They're making these people go back to Saudi Arabia. They're making them go to other places. But they're supposed to be exchanging prisoners. And when they took those 2 little coffins out of their vehicle to transfer them over as a hostage exchange, even the children of Hamas were jumping up and down and cheering because they were dead. And so we're told that this 2-horned ram is going to do something that's going to make the goat absolutely hate it and destroy and annihilate it. And that has been the term that's been used by 3 politicians. The Prime Minister of Israel and 2 politicians in the United States have said, we're going to annihilate them. We're going to take them off the map. So they are already talking about this very thing currently in politics in our countries. And I will show you a clip of that. Yes, Patty.
Why is the reason that this horn needs to move to westward, to Israel? What is the purpose? Do you know?
It's explaining that part of what is going to make everyone so angry is that it's going to try to expand its territory, and for a while it's going to look like nobody can stop it. And that's kind of how we feel about the terrorist organizations, don't we? They seem completely out of control. It seems like nobody can stop them. And that's what we're going to see is what they're going to say about this ram. So then it's going to expand northward, which is Syria. On a map, north of Iran is Syria. And we know for a fact that these terrorist organizations have practically completely taken over Syria. And recently, the United States came in and took out the leadership of Syria and helped put in their own approved person in the government of Syria. This just happened since Trump has taken office. And then southward would be Saudi Arabia. And we know that even as far back as 2023, Iran and Saudi Arabia made a pact together to support each other. And Iran and many of their terrorists hide in the country of Saudi Arabia. And so even in today's events that are happening, all of this is being fulfilled, and it's happening very quickly, very quickly. We know that one of the biggest fears is that Iran will get nuclear weapons. That is still one of the biggest fears. It's talked about all the time. And so it says, let me see what verse it is. Okay, so in verse 3, it starts to talk about the ram with two horns, and then how one was high, but the other is higher, and it comes up afterwards. And then in verse 4, it talks about the ram pushing westward and northward and southward, so that no beast could stand before him, neither was there any that could deliver out of his hand. When the terrorists attack, and they've been attacking in Europe and all kinds of places, they don't seem to ever really catch anybody. You know what I mean? It just seems like they just get away with it. It says he did according to his will and became great. And so this ram has grown up over time to become something very feared. Verse 5 starts in with the goat, and it explains how the goat, we're going to talk about the goat in a minute. I want to stay with the ram for just a minute. There was something I wanted to share with you, and now I'm blanking. Okay. So we know that this ram can easily, we can easily plug in Iran to this process and have it still be true to prophecy. It still ties with the Bible, and it still ties with the things that were being showed. It's an extension of the land of Persia from Bible times. So now, oh, there was an interesting thing here too I wanted to share with you in the book. It says the names for ISIS or the Taliban, the jihadists, they're all ideologies that hold up the ram. We've talked about that. The violence, the integration of these is spread. It's strengthened the beast. At the time I wrote the book, ISIS had committed 48 violent times in 28 days in Pakistan alone. And we just don't hear about a lot of this on the news because unless you tune into one of their news channels, you just don't hear about it. But it's happening like all the time. When the United States was in Afghanistan and then withdrew their power, I can't tell you the shame that our nation has experienced with this whole process because they intentionally botched that whole situation. We had soldiers that were wounded. If you saw the news, people were literally climbing on the planes that were leaving the country. Because if they had been translators or they had helped the American soldiers in any way, when our plane left the country with the last people on it, as we spoke through Afghanistan, ISIS was, they were coming through. And as they came through, they were going into the prisons and they were releasing all of the ISIS prisoners that the United States had captured. And they were releasing all of these ISIS people as our people fled the country. They did it totally backwards. They didn't do it the way they've ever done it leaving a country before. Normally you send your people home, you start to send your office workers home and that kind of stuff, but the military stays there. You get all of your military equipment out of the country. You help those who have been helping you get out of the country because they're going to be persecuted by the next power that takes over. They didn't do any of that. They literally, there was a plane that had American people and the people that worked for them on it. And all of a sudden, a general from the United States stepped on the plane and said, everybody off the plane and back into the airport. And the people were terrified because they knew exactly what was going to happen. And it did. The Afghanistan people were completely overrun by who was coming in. And they literally captured and tortured many of those people to death that were unloaded off of that plane. And the Americans that were on that plane were so enraged and upset at how this was happening, they couldn't believe it. But they literally flew out of the airport with people dropping off the plane that were trying to hang on to get in to get away. A bomb went off that blew up 13 of our soldiers within the wall of the airport. Dismembered them. It was just shameful. When they came home to our country, the country tried to act like it didn't have, it was just crazy. And you knew it had to be intentional. That can't be an accident. Nobody's that stupid. And so, they left. ISIS came in and began the process of torturing and hunting down people until finally some of the American soldiers that had been retired that were in special forces began getting people to let them use their planes, and they went into the country and started releasing people, kept helping some people escape that needed to get out and then our government found out what they were doing and they wouldn't land their planes. I mean, it was just crazy what was happening to the people there. But we left behind helicopters, jets, jeeps, vehicles, weapons, we armed ISIS. Literally, by the way we left the country. Yes, Patty.
You have Joshua and Julie who wants to ask a question. And then
Okay.
Sister Janita.
Okay, thank you. Julie, go ahead.
Hello, Sister Deborah. Yes, I have a question. It's about like 5 minutes back. Can you explain to me a little bit more about the horn that you say Iran and Iraq? And you say that one wants to take over of the other one, and it won't like annihilate it. So that thing that you say, it will be which horn? I don't know if I understood correctly.
Okay.
I was a little bit lost.
It's okay. I understand there's a lot of information here. So I'm gonna go back to the picture of the ram. Nope, I went too far. I had one of him there we go. Let me zoom in. Okay, so it has two horns. The little horn, which would be on the left in this illustration, is symbolic of Iraq. And Iran and Iraq have been talked about in the news, at least in the United States, for years and years and years and years and years. And we went to war during the Afghan war, and we took out Saddam Hussein, which was the leader of Iraq. And when we did, their government collapsed. And when their government collapsed, Iran, which had been growing in power, then really grew up to be a powerful nation. And their terrorism organizations and their, ISIS, Hezbollah, I mean, the names go on and on, Hamas, they began to expand not only in the Middle East, but if you were to listen to any of the government conversations that go on in the United States in Congress, they know that this ideology, these things that come from Iran funds almost all of these things. These things infiltrate everywhere. We have cells of them in the United States. There are cells of them in Europe. And we know because of in our country, when they were leaving the southern border wide open, we know that many of them got into our country and are here all over in the United, not the only country that they have infiltrated. So this ideology has spread everywhere, and Iran grew in power until Iran actually runs Iraq. It's still a separate country on a map, but they have taken over and they control. If you go into Iraq and you speak badly against Iran, you will suddenly have no friends. Everyone around you will disappear because they don't want to be known for talking bad about Iran. It's very, very clear. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Who else had a question?
Sister Yadira.
Hermana Pati, ¿me puede ayudar?
¿Sí?
Ahorita Dayana, perdón.
Ok.
Me olvidó. Hermana, bueno, Dayana.
Sorry. So your mama had a question. The story that you were telling, what year did it happen? Where you were saying that the government, the U.S. government, left all the equipment for ISIS
When
That was just this last year.
last year.
Mm-hmm.
And where was it? Sorry.
We were in Afghanistan.
Okay.
And we withdrew from Afghanistan, and the ISIS people came down through Pakistan, releasing people from prison as they came. And then as they came into Afghanistan, they just began to take over the country. And they're still having terrible problems with persecution there.
fue cuando unos soldados querían ayudar a las personas a entrar al aeropuerto.
So it was when like military people were trying to help people get out of the country, right? And you were saying that when they were trying to land on U.S. soil, that the airports wouldn't let them, right?
No, when the American soldiers went back to Afghanistan to get more people, in Afghanistan at the military base, they wouldn't let them land their airplanes.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
Patty?
Was that the news that they were saying that what was that the news when the U.S. government wanted to or took all the U.S. military out of their country? Was that that time?
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
You know, we pulled everything out,
Right now.
but we left behind every weapon. We left behind millions and millions of billions of dollars worth of equipment. We've never done that before. You don't arm the enemy, but they did very clearly. And even
let me tell them just in Spanish, just for them to remember this part of the news. Hermanas, ¿ustedes se recuerdan cuando en la televisión esto se vio en todo el mundo? Cuando Estados Unidos estaba removiendo todo su equipo militar, was it from Iran or Iraq? I get confused between those two.
was what from Iran?
That U.S. was removing their U.S. military.
From Afghanistan.
Fue cuando Estados Unidos estaba removiendo su equipo militar de Afganistán y que dijeron, se hizo una noticia muy grande porque Estados Unidos dejó completamente todas sus armas militares y venían en el avión y muchas personas, eso se hizo mundial, muchas personas querían venirse a salir de ahí porque tenían miedo y muchas personas estaban videos de que estaban llorando. Fue una noticia muy grande, solamente para recordarles a ustedes cuál es esa parte de la que ella está hablando.
Thank you. Gracias.
Okay, so we know that can easily be identified, but we know the battles that have gone on. So we're going to take a look now. We're going to shift to, I'm going to shrink this down again just a little bit so I can make sure. Can you see it all? Okay, you can.
I have a quick question before you move on.
Yes.
So do you think that they left everything behind because they couldn't bring it and they had to leave immediately, or because it would be more expensive to bring it back to the US?
I don't think it was either of those.
Oh, what do you
I believe they chose to leave it behind with intent to do harm.
Yeah, to make them powerful somehow, right?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
The weird part is, if you really do the research, guess who kind of created ISIS?
And I'm sorry, Sister Debbie, we have another one who has her hand raised, Sister Marlis.
Okay.
Oh,
But guess who created ISIS to start with? Our country. Our country created them so that they would go into other countries where we were having problems. They would wipe out the government leadership so that they could then put people in office that they wanted to be in office, that would cooperate with them. And that's a horrible thing to have to say about my country, but it is well documented.
Hmm.
Is it Marlis? Is that correct?
yeah, I have my hand yeah, that was I'm going to just say that people said my husband liked to check news every time. That's what I always see things that happen. Not me, but I do it because he's always watching this kind of news. And that's what people said that they create, even in the sermon of Walter Fight, we can see, we can hear what he said, that is that this country create groups like that, and then because we can use the logic thing that why they could leave all that kind of things that cost too much and leave people on everything, and they have a purpose. So it's not just like we cannot do anything to recover that. Is that they do it because they want to give that things to the groups because they create it. But what I don't understand about in Gaza and the Israel is that Israel killed too many people, and then when the what is the name of this group in
Hamas.
Hamas have Israel people, they do very loud voices about that, but they always just doing destruction in. I want to understand why Israel can do so many things, bad things, really bad things, and then when they have something of the same thing, the Christian people want to like defend Israel. I want to understand that because I don't think God, in my vision, I don't think God can support that or like that because they are people also, they kids, women, all
Yeah.
older people. So I want to see if I wrong, think that it's not fair that Israel can do whatever they want with Gaza people, but Pakistan or whatever, I'm confused with the names. But when they do something, when Hamas have, I don't know how many, they just like, oh no, they cannot do it, but they doing worse. I don't know if I'm wrong with that.
Well, I think that never, ever, ever is there anything good about war. And the cost is always on the innocent every time. If they would just keep war between, if they just make the generals get in a room and duke it out, we'd save a lot of lives, but they never choose to do it that way. But there's some things that you need to understand that tie in with this prophecy that have to do with Israel. So the entire evangelical religion believes that Israel has to be reestablished for a third time. That Israel needs to build a third temple. Walter Fife has done a whole thing on that I would encourage you to watch it if you haven't. It's called The Third Temple. And he explains that Israel is still looking for their Messiah. They've never accepted Jesus Christ as their Messiah. And so they want to rebuild the temple. They already have bred and brought in the red heifers for sacrifice. They have been getting the priests lined up. They have created the furniture that needs to go in the most holy place. They have the candlestick. They've built all of this according to the model that they're supposed to have. They are dedicating the priests anew. And the problem is, and this answers part of your question, it is the Muslim world that owns the Temple Mount that this temple needs to be built on. So this battle is as old as Isaac or
Hamas?
no, it goes way back. It's the war between, there we go, Ishmael and Isaac.
Oh, okay.
The Bible tells us that war never ends. Well, that's the same war. It's Israel as Isaac's descendants, and the Palestinians are Ishmael's descendants. And that's that battle that constantly goes on back and forth there. But in addition to that, there is a big push by the evangelical movement that Israel needs to be brought back to power so that their person, their Messiah, can come through the temple, can come from the temple. But for the evangelicals, they believe that is going to actually be the Antichrist who's going to begin what they believe is a millennium on earth where they're going to reign. The rapture comes into all of this. So they want Israel reestablished, they think, to activate the end time events. Israel is trying to activate end time events because they are already talking, they've been talking for about 5 years that their Messiah is already alive on the earth, but he has not revealed himself yet. But they are talking more and more and more. They have a priest who is deep into mysticism, and that's the problem. The Israelite nation has connected itself to spiritualism and mysticism. When Ellen White says they're going to reach that hand across the gulf, Israel is too. And this last week, the Muslim world, before the entire nation, might have even been a week and a half ago, but I think it was last week, they stepped forward and asked to meet with the Pope and asked him to bring them back into the fold and to bring them back to Rome. They literally asked for that reconnection between the Muslim world and Rome to take place. And for a long time, people have said, oh, that'll never happen. That'll never happen. And it just happened. And blew many people right out of the water because nobody saw it coming. And so Israel and what Israel does is no more right than what Hamas does. But I think the thing we need to bear in mind as we look at this is that Hamas has to be destroyed because while the Muslims have gone back to Rome, ISIS hasn't. Do you know what I'm saying? ISIS and Hamas and all of those are an extremist unit of the Muslim world. There are very sweet, wonderful Muslim people, and God is giving them visions and dreams. They're seeing visions of Jesus, and he's telling them, and the description that he gives as he talks to them, the description they will tell you is that he looks just like the description of Jesus in Revelation. They are being given visions of Jesus, and they are being told to find someone who's keeping the Sabbath. They are being told all of these things. And it is amazing Adventist World Radio recently, it was probably within the last year, had a miracle take place. They had a meeting and they were discussing that they needed to broadcast toward the Middle East in this language that hardly anybody knew, but they felt really impressed that they needed to start broadcasting in that language. And so they prayed about it, they got together and they found somebody who could speak it. And they started broadcasting the three angels' message in that language, believing they didn't know anybody who spoke it, but they felt impressed to do it. In this village that was completely shut off from the regular world and controlled by the Muslim leaders, the people could not have anything to do with Jesus or religion. Angels went into that village and handed out those Bible radios that had Adventist World Radio on them. They handed them out door to door, told them what channel to put it on and to start listening. And the people did, and it was the exact language that Adventist World Radio had started projecting in just months before, that they didn't know why. And eventually somebody had traveled out of that country, had gotten in touch with Adventist World Radio and shared their story with them. And so angels are doing what we can't, but we got to do the part we're supposed to do. So I hope that answered some of your question. Did it answer some of your question? So Israel is going to play a big part in the end times, not in the prophecies we look for, but in the prophecies that the false religions are looking for, and that the false outpouring of the Holy Spirit is going to be a part of. They're all looking to this, and there are many Adventists who are now beginning to believe that this is going to be one of the biggest ways that Satan will reveal himself as Christ one of the times that he does that. He's going to make himself look like Jesus coming out of the temple. We're told in the spirit of prophecy that his demons are going to even be able to replicate the disciples. It's going to look really real to people. They're going to believe that that's what it is. So we're going to go now. Did that answer the questions? Are we ready to go to the goat?
Sister Jody.
Yes, sorry, because I don't understand everything that why in the same in my same question, why United States left Afghanistan. I don't understand why that. Maybe hermana Patti, usted tiene alguna noticia que me quiera
So
partir.
we
Sorry, thank you.
we were planning through several administrations, several presidents' terms, to pull out of Afghanistan, because we went into Afghanistan for the Afghan war. We went in to take Saddam Hussein out, and then we were supposed to train them to take over their own country and leave. But we didn't. The trainings weren't going well, at least according to the military, who knows. They were saying the trainings weren't going well, the people weren't ready, and we stayed and we stayed and we stayed. And finally, during President Trump's first presidency, we were going to withdraw. If he was revoted, it would have been a part of his agenda to withdraw properly from Afghanistan. But during the Biden administration is when they just botched that whole thing, and more evidence is coming out to show that it was intentional. Just like having the southern border wide open for whoever's coming in a criminal way, they're letting all kinds of things in our country that should not be here. And it's because they had an agenda, a political agenda, to make things very much a mess in this country. And it's sad, but it's true. So that's why Trump came back in recently on this Make America Great Again. He has everybody believing that we're going to be okay now. We're going to be able to pull it back together. We're going to undo all the mess that happened, and our country will be great again. Prophecy tells us We're not headed for that direction. Okay, did that answer your question? Or is it any clearer, or is it still not clear? Okay, very good. All right, so now we're going to take a look at the he-goat that comes up from the west. So in your Bible, you guys will have to tell me when you're ready to stop, because I can do this all day. So you just tell me when you're done. All right. Okay, so it tells us in verse 5 of chapter 8, while he's watching this ram do its thing, there's a he-goat that comes up from the west. So when you talk about our globe today, where's the west? What does everybody believe the west is? You don't know? It's the Americas. Every history text, every news channel, when they refer to the West, they're referring to America. They're not referring to West in everybody's country. They're referring to America, North America. Sometimes even South America, but the Americas are what is considered West. East is considered Palestine, Russia, Asia. Those are always referred to as the Eastern countries, okay? And so when you hear about West and East, and then Europe kind of sits in the middle, yeah, and Africa, nobody really associates those with West or East, okay? But when you hear about those politically, those are the two different countries they're referring to. So it says the he-goat comes from the west on the face of the whole earth. So he's going to come across the globe. Yes? No. Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, just a quick question because we got a little confused. So you're saying West is referring to the US, right? West.
Yeah, Canada, the US, yes.
It's okay over there, Israel, and
Those are called the East.
that's the East.
Yes.
Okay.
Like
Yeah.
they call the oldest, right? The old.
The old countries are the East. Yep. The new countries are the West.
Okay, thank you.
Perfect. Okay. So the goat is going to come from the west across the face of the whole earth, and he's not going to touch the ground. So this vision that's taking place is a battle. Can we all agree on that? Because we know that a country is going to be so angry that it's going to annihilate another country, and then that country that wins is going to grow up great. That's a battle, right? So we know that it's a battle scene. So if you were to try to process in current day happenings, what would have to happen for someone to move across the face of the whole earth without touching the ground?
You asked the meaning
Yeah, any of you.
that it's not gonna do much effort.
Okay, it's going to be fairly easy, but it's probably going to be an aerial battle. Would that be a logical conclusion to come to? If it's going to come across the earth without ever touching the ground and there's going to be a fight, it has to come from the air, right? It can't come from anywhere else. And we know that the first time that the United Nations and America attacked Iraq, that is exactly what happened. They were on the southern tip of the island of Cyprus, where there's a military base for the UN, and there's a military, or NATO, which is UN's military troops. And then there is a base there for the United States. There's a military base there. From that base in Cyprus, they fired rockets into Iraq as that battle began. They literally just barraged them without ever, they didn't send foot soldiers in at first. This was just a major aerial assault on the country to cause a lot of damage. It says, the goat has a notable horn between its eyes. It came to the ram that had two horns, which had been seen standing before the river, and it ran to him in the fury of his power. And it saw him as it came close to the ram. It was filled with hatred. Choler is hatred of the highest kind against him, and smote the ram and broke two horns. And there was no power in the ram to stand before him, but he cast him to the ground and stamped upon him, and there was no one that could deliver the ram out of his hand. And then the goat is going to wax very great. So this goat is going to be filled with power. And symbolic of that growing very great means it's going to spread across the world with power. It's gonna not just be a local power, it's gonna become a global power. And then it says, when it becomes a global power, when it's strong, that great horn is gonna break off. And out of its place are gonna grow four horns that are gonna come up. And then one of those horns, it tells us, is going to grow very great up to heaven. And it goes on to describe it as a little horn that's going to wax exceedingly great toward the south, the east, and the pleasant land. And we know from Revelation and many other places that horn is symbolic of the Roman power that is going to take over again. We know that Rome is going to have another power, but this time it's not just Europe. This time it's going to be the whole world. We're told the whole world is going to wander after the beast. So when we look at this, it gives a definition, trying to look for, okay, so we go over to verses 19 to 25, and in 19 to 25 it gives you the answer for what things are. So in 19 it says, in the last end of the indignation. So what does that mean? If you're at the last end of something, go ahead.
What chapter?
We're in 8, verse 19.
Okay.
So what is the last end of something? Is there any more of it left? No. And we know that Rome is going to be that indignation, right? It's going to bring in a Sunday law. It's going to try to break the law of God. It's going to try to establish itself as a kingdom. So we know that this is talking, when it says the last end of the indignation, this is the final battle scene. This is the last days before Jesus comes. Verse 20 says, the ram which you saw having two horns is Media Persia, which we've already discussed, can easily be Iran and Iraq in a modern day understanding. Verse 21 says, the rough goat is the king of Greece, and the great horn that is between his eyes is the first king. So we've heard it taught that the goat is Greece, the nation, but that's not what the scriptures say. What do the scriptures say that body of that beast is?
Can you repeat the question, please? Because
Yes. We have heard it said that the body of that goat is Greece, but the
Mhm.
scriptures don't say that. In verse 21, what does it say that goat's body is?
The king of Greece.
It's the king of Greece, okay? And then it says the great horn that's between his eyes is the first king. So I'm gonna make a proposal here, and you can tell me if this sounds too off the mark, okay? We know from the first battle that took place, the UN was deeply involved in that process. We know that our world is about to experience a new world order. We know that the United Nations is the seat of where that is going to come from. That is becoming more clear every day with everything that's happening. And we know that NATO is the power that is the military might that gives the UN a bite. Every country has to have a military power that gives it teeth, or whatever it says doesn't matter. And so NATO is the military power that gives the UN its power. Now, we're watching the UN grow in power and grow in power. We have even learned recently that ADRA is an NGO of the UN, that our church in the 1980s became an NGO of the UN. We agreed to promote their policies, and that's when we started getting those 52 articles that the leaders of the General Conference put into place without anybody voting on them. And some of the policies they voted on was to accept the Laudato Si message, is to accept the Green New Deal, is to accept the mandates issued from the WHO. We know that ADRA is connected and has, like I said earlier, has been getting millions of dollars to help bring illegals in and to do all kinds of things for the government. And while that is terrifying, it is true. And if you want to see some of the articles that have been produced about that show the proof, I will share them with Patty, and she can pass them on to you.
Sister Jadira had her hand raised before.
Yes.
No, I'm sorry. I feel a little confused. So we are looking that the goat is the of the OTAN, the NATO and the United States together, or
It's going to be the UN, NATO, the WHO,
yeah,
all of those combining
So
to
the-
make
the
the
one-
new world order.
the one world order,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Okay, I got it.
But
Okay,
the United States is involved in that process. So as
Yes.
we look at the horn on this animal,
mhm.
what country in the world has the most military presence in NATO?
United States.
The United States does, okay? And we know from prophecy that the United States is going to kind of be separated from the first beast. It's not going to be in the first beast. It's going to be its own beast to help the world follow that first beast, right? So they have to be separated. So the first time we went in and hit Iraq, over 70 to 80% of the military might in that attack was from the United States. And we know that right now, our president has done things that make people go, wait a minute, wait a minute. He just withdrew from the United Nations. He just withdrew from the WHO. He just withdrew from the Paris Accord Agreement. He just withdrew from everything that we have been almost heading up ourselves, because he claims those other nations aren't paying their part and America is financially paying for everybody to be protected. And we're not going to do that anymore. The other nations need to step up and do their own. So as we look at prophecy, we're all stepping back going, wait a minute, wait a minute, wait a minute. But then, like I said, in recent news clips, all of a sudden it has come about that they're saying that they are going to annihilate the Iranian people. They're going to demolish the Iranian people. So I'm going to show you that their mouth is saying one thing and then their mouth is saying another thing. Yeah, it's just like, and there's no logic to it. But there's also something else that was rather interesting. Not very long ago, probably 6 months ago, the United Nations referred to the Pope as the first king of the UN. That was literally their terminology. And we know that our presidents in the United States don't do anything before they go visit the Pope. Trump visits him. Elon, who he's relying on heavily, like he goes to see the Pope almost every month. They're constantly having meetings with the Pope. So it wouldn't be hard for that horn to be the papacy controlling the nations that are in power. It wouldn't be hard for that horn to be the military power. This is one of those things we're going to fully understand as we watch it unfold. So we know that this goat is going to come from the west. It's not going to hardly touch the ground. And that using this evil horn, it is going to annihilate the two-horned ram. And part of the reason that that has to take place is even though our country created this monster, the best way for me to put it. Rome can't control it. And we're told that all the world is going to worship that beast. And we're told that the United States as the second beast is going to force all the world to worship that beast. And I believe it is a political move that they can't control this monster they've created anymore. It's gotten way out of control. And since they can't control it, they're going to get rid of it. Because that's going to be the only way to bring all the world into compliance. The rest of the world is already in compliance. Every single part of it. We watched that when, oh help me, what country was it where the new president was just slamming the Pope and talking about how horrible he was 1 minute, and then all of a sudden the Pope called him in to see him and he was like bowing to him and worshiping him and hugging him and crying. I don't remember what country that was. It was somewhere in South America, just recently.
Argentina.
Argentina, thank you. And I mean, we watch anyone who tries to speak against Rome is just suddenly brought back in check over and over and over. And Iran will not be brought in check. And their fear is they're going to get a nuclear weapon and that they're going to start bombing the United States or Europe or other countries where they just hate them so much. And that is still a possibility, to be quite honest. They've already threatened to blow up New York. They've been very clear about that. So we will see exactly how this unfolds. But it's very clear that there's a final conflict between these two entities and that one doesn't make it out, according to the prophecy. And my heart is so sad because there are so many innocent people in those countries. And we need to be praying for their souls because they need to know Jesus before they die. And I think that's why Jesus is sending them visions of himself, and he is trying to reveal himself to them because he knows how short the time is. And he knows what's going to happen. And even if they die saved, they have eternity. And that's the thing that is so very important. So after the pandemic happened, we watched the United Nations suddenly come into play. I mean, we'd heard about it, it was out there, but all of a sudden, the WHO is calling the shots and all of these things are happening and we're like, what? And this is what's crazy. Under President Biden, there were 190, I don't remember how many countries there are. But all but 2 countries signed the document that the WHO would have to declare pandemics, to declare emergencies, and all of the nations would have to comply and do what the WHO said. And even the United States signed that document, which means you don't have the power in your country to say, we're not going to participate in that. You have to cooperate. So there were only 2 countries that didn't sign the document. You know, the 2 countries were Rome and Iran. Every other country agreed to that document. Now, President Trump has come in and supposedly we're withdrawn from the WHO. But we all know that in 5 minutes, that could change. Because he could suddenly say, oh, okay, they're all complying. We're going to go back. We're going to reconnect. So even though he withdrew, we're all sitting here kind of counting to see how long that lasts. We don't believe it will last forever. All right, how are we doing? Is everybody getting tired? Patty?
Yes, I don't know if they want to continue or if you want to continue from where we are, from here next Sunday.
Sabbath.
I'm sorry, yes, next Sabbath, yes.
Sunday for me.
You mean Sabbath, el próximo sábado, next Sabbath, next Saturday, right, hermana Aurora?
I just had a question. Your voice got cut off when you were saying that under President Biden, there were 190 who signed to agree to be in the pandemic. Is that what you said?
No, they signed to agree to give the WHO the power to have a global power that would tell all of the nations they can say what's a pandemic, they can say when it's a pandemic, and they can issue the laws that go with it, and it overrides all of the nation's laws. And the WHO has the power to override every nation's law.
Thank you.
So I tell you what, if you can give me about 5 more minutes, we'll finish with the ram, and then we can we'll finish with the goat, and then we can pick up with, next time we can pick up when the horn's broken off and the 4 come up out of it. Would that be okay? That way it'll give us a clean cut. Okay. So this goat, we know is gonna finish off the ram through that process. That horn that is the might, that is the power, just like when Greece quickly went across the earth and it conquered all of Media Persia. This ram, I'm sorry, the goat is going to quickly, this act of annihilation is going to happen really fast. It's just going to be gone, gone, gone. And then the whole world is going to rejoice because that power, that thing they fear all the time is gone. And they're going to give all kinds of power to the UN, to that one world order that has saved them from this evil power. And when that takes place, the United States is going to be separated from the UN. It has to be, because when we'll take a look at this later, this one world order is going to incorporate these 4 beasts that we looked at in earlier in Daniel. We're going to show how they make that conglomerate beast all together, in Revelation 13. All those powers are going to come together to make that new world order that is going to control things. We know that the whore, which is symbolic of the Vatican and the power of that system, are going to ride or control that beast. And we know that those are going to be the kings. We looked at that quote earlier where she said that this represents the governments of the world that will persecute the people of God. And Rome all by itself does not have the power to persecute everybody. It has to have a military might. In the past, it used the Roman national power to put teeth to what it said. In the future, it's going to use the United Nations, it's going to use the NATO, it's going to use the global powers, and the United States is going to help. The whole world is going to be forced to worship that beast. Now, Ellen White says that that beast is the papacy, but she also says that it's the governments of the world that are going to do the persecuting. So we know that, and we'll look at another poster next time that shows that the United States is going to it's going to force the world to worship that first beast, that Satan's going to give all his power to that first beast, and it's just going to create this triangle of trouble, shall we call it, for the last days. So after ISIS and Hamas and all those terrorist organizations are destroyed through Iran, they're going to take it out. So if you have just a second, do you want to see where they've talked about that? Or do you want me to just send it to Patty so you can watch it later?
We can watch it now, right? Raise your hand if you guys are okay with it.
Okay, all right. I'll grab it real quick for you. I'm going to stop sharing my screen just for a second so that I'm a little bit distracted by too many things on my screen. Okay, let me see if I can. I'm sorry, I'm trying to find the shortest thing so this doesn't take long. Okay, here's Netanyahu. And he's literally promising that we're going to help do it. So hang on one second. Let me get
Secretary of State Marco
Let me
Rubio speaking about.
share my screen here. If I were a teenager, this would go so much faster. Okay, can you see it?
Not yet.
No.
We can see it now.
Yes.
alongside the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu after Marco Rubio made his first trip as Secretary of State to the region. Let's go now to CNN's Nick Robertson, who's standing by live in Jerusalem. They obviously covered a lot of ground there, and both leaders did reiterate America's unwavering support for Israel and the fact that they both have a common strategy. Well, what stood out to you, Nick?
Yeah, one of the things that really stood out was just how joined up this was, that they both spoke.
Sorry, my internet is very tired.
All the hostages will be released. You know, they broke it down into key areas, but that thing that they both referred back to several times, Iran. And when they said Iran, they both said this is the Ayatollahs, the regime, clearly trying to present that daylight, that they're not speaking about the people of Iran, but this is something against the Ayatollahs of Iran. They will not be allowed to get a nuclear weapon, something that they could use as leverage. Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, went on to say. So there was joined up absolute clarity on Iran, and a line drawn that says very clearly that Iran is behind the instability in Lebanon, the instability in Syria, Hamas, other groups, Iran as well, the West Bank market.
Okay, I'm going to pause it. It's just coming through really poorly, and it's going to probably be really confusing to try to watch. But I'll send the clips to Patty so that you can watch them when your internet is working. But literally, there's 3 clips that were on the news Friday where Trump said that they were going to completely annihilate Iran if they didn't let the hostages go free, and if they didn't, or if they tried to do anything further with a weapon. And then Iran broke their deal and stopped bringing hostages, and that whole thing went uneasy again. And then Netanyahu was saying, if they don't release all of the people, we're just going to annihilate them. And that the United States, over and over, he has said that the United States will be the power. They will be the military might that's going to do this act. So I will share those with Patty. She can share them with you, because I don't want to spend a lot of time trying to fix that. Do you have any more questions before we close? Looks like you have a Bible study coming in, Aurora.
Sister Marlis has a question, I guess.
Yes.
Do you think there's gonna be a third, another world war? The third would be because these things that they say they're gonna do happens. If that happens, it's gonna be like a third world war. Do you think? Because I always thought that there's not gonna be things like that, but people
We
say.
used to have ministers that used to teach that there would never be a third world war.
Mhm.
But if you study the spirit of prophecy, she is very clear that not only will there be wars, and well, the Bible's clear, wars and rumors of wars. It may not be like a war we've had before, because now they can take out electric grids. There can be all different kinds of ways with satellites to fight wars. They don't have to be the same way they've always been. But we know she has a quote that says that Russia, India, China, and the United States will experience civil war, because the poor are going to rise up against those that are oppressing them. And we know that the United States is going to experience financial collapse, absolute ruin, she says, when they implement the Sunday law. So we know that there's going to be, there's going to be so much stuff going down and all at the same time, and that there's not going to be all the communications that we have now. So we're not going to always know what's happening all around the world. We may only know what's happening to us at given times. And that may come and that may go. They may fix parts of it, they may not. But we do know that wars are very clearly going to be a part of that. Sister White talks a lot about wars at the end of time. She also describes the fact that war is the way that Satan can reap a harvest of unsaved souls very quickly. He can snuff out life, and that's his goal. That's what he wants to be able to do. That's why we have to get this message out to people. We have to reach people, because we don't know how long anybody's time is. As crazy as things are and the times that we live in, we don't know. We do know the cities are going to experience destruction. She talks about thousands of big cities being destroyed. She talks about entire fleets of ships, thousands of them going down in the sea with their precious cargo. She talks about the shores, the waves overflowing their boundaries and the problems that that's going to cause. Earthquakes in crazy places and hurricanes and storms and sickness and pestilence. We have only nibbled on the cracker, I'm afraid. Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. All right. If nobody else has a question, I'll send those videos to Patty so that you can watch them. And then we will pick up next Sabbath with the horn breaking off the goat and the 4 that rise up out of it, and all that goes from there. In the meantime, if you watch your news, these events with Iran are getting very serious, and they're about to unfold rather quickly. And when they do, that's going to be the gateway that opens the way for this global power and for the rising up of these countries from the past that are going to rise to new power. So we'll take a look at that when we meet again. But remember, he loves us. He is with us. He is bigger than all of this. And he is faithful.
Amen.
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 Patty, you want to pray? Or somebody? You can pick who.
Who would like to pray? Okay, Sister Aurora is praying.